Senator, welcome. Merry Christmas, and how are you doing?
Merry Christmas. Great to be with you. And I didn't realize that our interview was covering Alien and Gladiator. All the better.
Listen, you and Ridley Scott in the same hour. It's the Mark Davis show, man. That's exactly what it is. So I just want to thank you. I haven't had the chance to thank you in person. And a lot of other people said, hey, Mark, happy birthday, blah, blah, blah. Senator Ted Cruz takes us on a history lesson of 1957 and how dreadfully virtually everything has gotten since then. But the good news is there are people trying to fight to restore some greatness, and boy, did we do it this week.
Indeed. This is a very good week for America, a very good week for Texas. Well, we have seen historic tax cuts passing through Congress, and come January 1, small businesses, farmers, ranchers, hardworking families, parents, young people, Texans are going to benefit enormously from a really significant tax cut.
You could not have, to follow the Hollywood imagery, we couldn't have scripted it any better for businesses, as if on cue, to start doing exactly what we've all said they were going to do, to look at the prospect of keeping more profit to which they are entitled and immediately benefiting workers and the economy and the physical plants, AT&T, Comcast, Wells Fargo, raising salaries, giving bonuses, committing to more investment. They did it within the first 24 hours.
No, that's exactly right. And you look at one of the key parts of this tax cut is cutting taxes on small businesses, on job creators. If you look at our corporate tax rate, it right now is 35%, which is the highest in the developed world. A lot of people don't realize our corporate tax rate, it's higher than pretty much all of Europe. It's higher than England. It's higher than France. It's higher than Germany. You know what Ireland's corporate tax rate is?
It's particularly low, isn't it?
12.5%.
Yeah, why a ton of businesses have like headquarters in Dublin or Shannon.
Right. They're eating our lunch. And what's happened, I mean, we saw it throughout the 8 years of Obama, which is U.S. companies fleeing America, taking jobs overseas. It's bad for our economy, bad for jobs. This tax cut cuts the corporate tax rate from 35%, which is making us completely uncompetitive, down to 21%, which means businesses, job creators have money to invest. And you're right, we're seeing business after business after business. Just AT&T announced $1 billion in new investments, and also every single employee getting a $1,000 bonus. There are a lot of North Texas AT&T employees, over 200,000 worldwide, getting a bonus as a direct result of this tax cut. And that's on top of the fact that the individual rates for individuals and families are going down. And so we're going to see a real difference come your February pay stub is the first pay stub that'll be reflected, and you'll see a real tax cut and a real increase in your take-home pay.
So as all of the rhetorical battles were being waged, I can understand a Chuck Schumer disagreeing with it. I can understand. And then for this, we go back to your floor speech, which we played in its virtual entirety with even very little annotation from me. Imagine that. But there you are. And you started out by saying, of course, it's a happy day. Of course, it's a day for celebration. But it's also a day of sadness as the rank craven partisanship is just so there's not a single Democrat who could have voted for this thing.
It really is stunning, and it's a sad statement about where we are in Washington, that it's gotten so bitterly partisan. There was a time not very long ago where tax cuts were a bipartisan endeavor. Ronald Reagan in 1981, 1986, major tax cuts. That was passed with Tip O'Neill, a Democrat, as Speaker of the House. The leader in the House was then a conservative Democrat, Phil Graham from Texas, carried the Reagan tax cuts in the House of Representatives. In the Senate in 86, one of the leaders was a liberal Democrat, Bill Bradley from New Jersey.
Yeah.
Today, major tax cuts for Americans all across the country. In the House, not a single Democrat voted for it. In the Senate, not a single Democrat voted for it. And instead, so not only are they completely unwilling to cut taxes on small businesses, on job creators, on working families, but the rhetoric they're using, they're demagoguing it in a way that's just, I think the technical term for it is batty.
Yeah.
I mean
that is the diagnosis. I believe that is, and I believe. Listen, you know the landscape better than I, because you know these folks firsthand. Run into them, I'm guessing, in the dining room. I think there are 4 or 5 Democrats who thought this was probably a pretty good bill. I think one of them might have been the poor, tortured Joe Manchin, who was just outed on a West Virginia radio show. You familiar with this audio? There's Joe.
I haven't heard it.
There's Joe. My first radio job was in West Virginia. And at that time, up the road in Morgantown, I was in Charleston, there was a news guy with a great West Virginia name, Hoppy Kercheval. And he's now like the dean of interviewers. And he had Joe Manchin on, because Joe's all over the place in terms of he's trying to get reelected. And Hoppy asked him, he said, Joe, West Virginia likes this bill. Coal miners like this bill. What are you thinking? He simply had no answer. He was not able to pull out a Chuck Schumer index card, because I think Joe Manchin is okay with his bill. He pretty well admitted there are good things to it, and then had a very hard time explaining why he had to vote against.
Well, so let me tell you a story about Joe Manchin and just how extreme the Democratic Party is, which is one of the best parts of this tax cut bill. Is an amendment that I introduced that was adopted that expands education options. And what it does, it addresses college 529 savings plans.
Right.
And as you know, Mark, 529 savings plans are immensely popular. Right now, many Texans use them, and they allow parents and grandparents to save in a tax-advantaged vehicle for college expenses for their kids and grandkids. Mm-hmm. The amendment I introduced expands 529 savings plans. So now, in addition to saving for college, you can also save for K through 12 education. You can save for public school, private school, parochial school, religious school. Up to $10,000 per year per child can be spent out of these plans to cover education expenses. And it is the most significant federal school choice legislation that has ever been passed by Congress, and it is in the bill. Well, let me tell you some of the drama of how it passed, because it was interesting. When the Senate took up the tax bill, it was after midnight, Friday night, early Saturday morning, and we took it up. It was clear that it was going to be close. It was going to be narrow. We have 52 Republicans, as you know, in the Senate. Early on, we lose 2 Republicans. And so the Senate floor staff picks up the phone and calls the Vice President's office, says, Mr. Vice President, looks like we may need your vote. We may have a tie. The Vice President was at his residence. He wasn't at the Capitol.
Right.
So he goes and gets in the motorcade, starts heading down to the Capitol. I'm talking to the 2 no votes were Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. I'm talking to Lisa Murkowski, trying to persuade her maybe to reconsider. Mm-hmm. As we're talking, behind me, Joe Manchin walks up and votes yes. And there's an audible gasp in the well of the Senate. People are astonished.
Right.
So the Senate floor staff picks up the phone, calls the Vice President's office, says, Mr. Vice President, we just got Manchin. It looks like we don't need you. And so the Vice President turns the motorcade around, starts heading back to the residence.
Right.
Manchin returns to his desk, and a sea of Democrats descend on him like locusts and just begin pounding the living daylights out of the poor guy. He spends about 5 minutes listening to it, and then he walks down sheepishly and changes his vote to a no.
Welcome to today's Democratic Party.
And, of course, what happened, the Senate floor staff picked up the phone, called the Vice President's office a third time, said, Mr. Vice President, we do need your vote. So he turned the motorcade around yet another time. Takes about 15 minutes to get from the Naval Observatory down to the Capitol. The Vice President walks in past midnight and says there are 50 ayes, there are 50 nays, the Senate being evenly divided. The presiding officer votes in favor of the amendment. The amendment is adopted. And with that, the most significant school choice victory, a victory for 50 million school kids across the country, and empowering parents and grandparents to be able to save for those kids, for their education, empowering the ability of kids to choose a great education passed into law, and that's effective January 1.
Well, the most important thing is that it happened, and thank you for that. But just the to hear you weave that story, I don't expect Democrats to vote like you. I mean, come on, there's a reason we have 2 parties. Sure. There's a liberalism and conservatism have a meaning. But the Democratic Party of John F. Kennedy, Scoop Jackson, it's dead. I mean, the sometimes annoying thing about republicanism is there are so many different ways to be. I envy the Democrats, their lockstep discipline. But gosh, the price for that is if you are a left of center, fairly reasonable person who's kind of okay with God and guns and et cetera, the Democratic Party will purge you.
You are exactly right. And the dynamic, I suspect you're right that I think there are probably a number of Democratic senators who personally would be fine with cutting someone's taxes.
Yeah.
But what has happened in the Democratic Party, it's Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
They hate the president so much that they're just consumed by it. And the far left, the radical left that is the Democratic base, is demanding of Democrats resist, oppose, obstruct, filibuster, fight everything. And so you get every Democrat voting to filibuster practically every piece of legislation, to oppose practically every nominee, to vote lockstep against cutting anyone's taxes. And the dynamic is that I had earlier this year a liberal Democrat in the Senate tell me, look, you got to understand, we are terrified of getting primaried from the left. And he said, we're much more concerned about getting primaried than we are about the general election. And so in today's Senate, there are no moderate Democrats because Joe Manchin's voting record, Heidi Heitkamp's voting record is indistinguishable from Chuck Schumer's.
That is it. That's it.
And the heart of the Senate Democrats right now is Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
And
they direct, and it's driven to the radical left. That's not healthy for our country. We ought to be working together. We ought to be coming together and finding solutions for the people we represent, and yet Washington is very polarized right now.
And last thing, I don't think is going to work out well for. I mean, listen, Chuck Schumer is safe. Dick Durbin is safe. But you take a look at Joe Manchin in West Virginia, Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, Claire McCaskill in Missouri, a state that loves Trump. It chapped me. I mean, I was willing to hold my nose and hope that Roy Moore could, somehow get there and vote the right way and not care about other things. We got a Democrat. It's Doug Jones. He seems to be a fairly reasonable soul as Democrats go. But maybe we make that Alabama result irrelevant by taking back 3, 4, 5 of those states in 2018. Is that reasonable? Is that doable?
Look, I think we have a real potential to do that. It all depends on turnout. The hard left is going to show up. They are so angry. They hate the president so much. They're going to show up. And what matters is conservatives have got to show up. It's a turnout election, and if we turn out conservatives in Texas and across the country, we will have a very, very good election. I will say, I think on this tax cut, I think the Democrats are badly overplaying their hand because they're telling the American people your taxes are going up, and that's not sort of true. It's not a little bit true. It's wildly and totally false. And the beauty of it is Americans can assess this because come February, I pointed out in the floor speech that you played, in the Old Testament there was a test for a prophet. Someone came forward and said they were a prophet. The test was, okay, fine. Make a short-term prophecy and let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. Well, the Democrats have told the American people as a result of this tax cut, a little bit incoherent even saying it, but this is their argument, as a result of this tax cut, your taxes are going up. What I'm urging people to do is, come February, take a look at your pay stub and compare it to your pay stub from a year earlier and see if you're paying more taxes or less taxes. And I'll tell you, for Texans, it's going to be very clear. It's not complicated. Every marginal tax rate goes down. The child tax credit doubles from $1,000 a child to $2,000 a child. So for a single mom who's got 3 kids, your tax credit goes from $3,000 to $6,000. That's real money in your pocket immediately. And what the Democrats are telling people is just objectively false. And I think the American people are going to notice it when they have more money in their pockets.
That they will. And they will notice a number of things in 2018, a year in which I look forward to many conversations with you. Let me thank you for the time you spent this year and just the continued joy of your friendship and your service. Merry Christmas to you and Heidi and Caroline and Catherine. Just God bless you and thank you so much.
Well, Merry Christmas, Mark, and thank you for all the great work you do each and every day.